of the most balanced teams, on both ends of the floor. I think they're the only team this season that has been top 5 in both offensive and defensive rating. They have, an offensive captain, an all-star, Donovan Mitchell, a defensive captain, and Rudy Gobert, who's number 2 in blocks, number 2 in rebounds, 13 rebounds a game. I also love what the Phoenix Suns have done. Chris Paul walks into the building, into the locker room, and guess what? He makes everyone have this expectation to win. And I think, Devin Booker is obviously, right next to Damian Lillard, per what LeBron James tweeted, one of the most disrespected but most feared guys, when it comes to his shooting ability. I say all of that to still say that it's the Los Angeles Clippers that are probably, the same team in the same town right here where I'm at in Los Angeles, the Los Angeles Clippers that are probably the biggest rival, to the Lakers in the West, just because what I love about them is they have 2 surefire talent. And I know a lot of people want to talk about what, Paul George did last year in the playoffs. I hate all of y'all's nicknames, the way off, all that type of stuff. What he has done this season has been super impressive. Very close to having a 50, 40, 90 type of season, shooting the ball extremely well, tag teaming with Kawhi Leonard, who obviously, when it comes to the playoffs, when healthy and 100% and rested, is a guy that a lot of people know he knows how to win. So that dynamic duo on both ends, just being able to match up with LeBron James and potentially challenge Anthony Davis when he comes back. I'm looking at the Clippers still, largely because they made this big gamble in switching their head coaches from Doc Rivers to Ty Lue to sort of help Paul George be great again, right? Paul George said, hey, like these pin downs, that's not my speed. That's not my style. They made that big gamble, and it sort of paid off when it comes to Paul George's game so far, this season. So I really do think it'll come down to the city of LA. Even though I love what, Utah has been able to do so far this season, they will make noise based on the, confidence they're building in the regular season. But right now, they have a combination of defense, of offense, of now coaching that sort of is helping their stars get over the mental humps. And I do think that they're still the biggest threat to the Lakers in the West.
If I'm Donovan Mitchell and I'm sitting at home, I don't know if he's up right now, but if I'm sitting at home, I'm listening to Chanae right now because she started off right. Talking about all the ways that Utah, between Rudy Gobert, me, Donovan Mitchell, like even Mike Conley, perfect setup guy. And then we veered and started talking about some other people. Like, what do the standings say right now? So here's the thing. Like LeBron even trying to throw shade, like no shade, but shade to the Utah Jazz, like recently. Like, what's the deal with Utah? Somebody tell me, what is the problem? Why can't we just give them their props when they're due? Why we got the flashy lights of LA? No. Utah, that if I'm the Lakers and I'm a team, if I'm LeBron and I'm like, oh, I got to hold this together while, until AD gets back. Yeah, like put some respect on their name. What's going on?
No. First of all, Donovan Mitchell's my guy. 3 Stripes Life family. Okay, Kimberly. But
Will he still be?
Because I know that what I say will motivate him to do what he needs to do when it comes to the playoff time. Okay. So I got my bro.
Kimberly, this was all about motivation. Okay. This was all about motivation. That was it.
Yeah. Motivation works 2 ways, though.
I got you.
The motivation works 2 ways, and now you sit here and LeBron's watching this too. And think about the biggest threat to the Lakers is health. That's the biggest threat, because if AD cannot get healthy and stay healthy, that is the only thing that's going to derail the Lakers. And it's not going to be because of LeBron. It's not going to be because of AD. It's going to be because all the other guys on the team. Dennis the Menace is playing extremely well. Montrezl Harrell, who they took from the Clippers, who I thought were going to be their biggest threat, is not their biggest threat. And Utah Jazz, the Utah Jazz reminds me of that team out east called the Milwaukee Bucks. You have a great season. You do all these things, but the playoffs is a different beast. I'm telling you, the Lakers have won a championship. And they know the only way to be thought of as a great team is to go back to back. If you think about all the teams throughout the NBA history, oh, that's nice. They won the NBA championship. But they're not considered great until they go back to back. And that's what LeBron and AD wants to do. So they're motivated. And it doesn't matter where they finish because it's COVID. We don't know what's going on, the protocol for people coming into the arenas. We know Utah have fans, and they're going to need their fans because they are not the Lakers' biggest threat. And I love Rudy Gobert. I think he's one of the best players defensively. He's underrated. But the biggest threat to the Lakers is health. Nobody else in the West.
All right, well, let's transition to the East. Kevin Durant, still his return has not yet been announced, but the Nets are the favorites in the East. So, Chiney, who do you think is the biggest threat for the Nets?
You know, if I could pick an abstract, of course I'd say health is the biggest threat for both conferences, right? Okay, Rob? Because clearly they need Anthony Davis, and guess what? Kevin Durant is the icing on the cake on the newly acquired Blake Griffin team, James Harden, Kyrie Irving. It's unfair. But the biggest threat to them on the floor, absolutely Joel Embiid, and I have him right now as MVP of the NBA. I know all you guys in my LA fandom, whatever the case is here in the city, are going to be worried because I'm switching from LeBron James to Joel Embiid, but he is the most dominant player right now, and he's doing it from the center position. The last 2 weeks have changed a lot, especially, as Rob says, you know, when it comes to health. And the reason I'm talking about the Philadelphia 76ers, I know a lot of people the last few years have been talking about their offensive limitations and pointing to Ben Simmons and saying, we need you to shoot the ball. You shrink the floor for Joel Embiid. Well, guess what? They've figured themselves out in a very impressive fashion. You know, it's been really interesting to see how ever since that James Harden blockbuster trade, we knew exactly who the hierarchy was on this team, meaning Ben Simmons was kind of in those conversations. Joel Embiid was not, and he's delivered so far this season. He's having career highs, you know, both not only around the rim, but more importantly, I think he's shooting like 42% from three. He has been dominant. And the one thing that we've asked of Joel Embiid is health and pretty much availability and consistency, right? And he's delivered on all of those things. And the thing that I love the most about this Sixers team is because, like, you know how sometimes when you play for a city, you know, that's sort of what you embody as a team. I mean, Philadelphia is gritty. And the way that they will compete come playoff time, when we're talking about a year where there's so many teams, you know, shooting record numbers of threes right now, right? The only way they will compete at a high level versus a Brooklyn Nets team that is, you know, on pace to when they have their core four together is to defend. And this team has length at all of the necessary positions. Ben Simmons, Defensive Player of the Year candidate, you know, his length, he leads in a lot of hustle stats like deflections, loose balls recovered. You look at the wing, all right? You've got Tobias Harris having a great season, you know, 20 points per game, who can guard wing defenders. And at the center, you have another Defensive Player of the Year candidate in Joel Embiid. So defensively, you know, when the game slows down, I look forward to this Philadelphia 76ers team leaning on that as their strength. But more importantly, offensively, they know who the go-to is. That's Joel Embiid, and they figured a lot out this season.
It's crazy you mentioned Tobias Harris, who I covered in high school on Long Island. That's crazy to think about how good he is.
We're in the same high school class, by the way.
On this. Good for you. Chiney's actually right on this one with the Sixers, because I think if you have anybody who's in the MVP conversation in your division, you like in your conference, like you have to be a little bit worried about them, right? And I will say agree 100% with Chiney. I will say the thing that the Sixers also have, in addition to like all these playmakers, they have the benefit and the luxury of time together, you know, like they have cohesion. Like this is a group that's been together, whereas in Brooklyn, shout out Brooklyn, that's where I'm from, talk about gritty. But like with the Nets, like you're putting these pieces together, and the big question when they got together was like, oh, is this gonna work? Like, can we see these three pieces coming together and like really gelling, and who's gonna distribute the rock? Like who's the person that's really gonna be the lead? And what we've seen is they've answered those questions. Which is great. But they just got together. So I think that's another thing the Sixers have, just time together and a lot of playmakers.
Yeah, the Sixers are right for the taking over there in the East. And you look at this Nets team, it's like, how are they going to work together? I know they're looking really good right now because they have two big dogs. Then they're going to have another big dog. Then they're going to have another big dog. Now you got four big dogs. I remember when I was on the Lakers and we had four guys, all-stars. We got swept in the second round by the Utah Jazz. And it's not always about having a lot of talent. You know, sometimes too much talent gets in the way. And I know James Harden is. I'm so proud of him. He's taking the back seat and he's trying to dish and do the right things. But I think the biggest threat to those guys right now is Joel Embiid, because Joel Embiid is that rare center that we don't see anymore, who can do it in the post, who can do it outside. I know you can probably say there are other guys like the Joker can do it, but he can't score like Embiid in this side. Embiid, when I watch him, he reminds me of one of the greatest centers that ever played this game, Hakeem Olajuwon. His footwork in the paint, his ability to score and block shots and be there for his teammates is incredible. So that's the only threat that the Nets have. Everybody else is just on the sidelines looking.
Well, lots of worthy teams to make the NBA Finals. Another big question mark, will there be an arena full of fans when that happens? Of course, the COVID-19 vaccination will have a lot to do with that. We're going to talk about that in just a bit. But first, Robert, you held your own. I know this is an intimidating crew, but you did it.
Yes, Rob.
Thank you for coming on. We appreciate you.
Thank you.
Outnumbered.
I appreciate you.
All right, let's move on because we
I
are
know.
going to get to that COVID-19 vaccination as it pertains to LeBron James. He says he deserves privacy about his choice to get the vaccine. Do Kimberley and Shanae agree? That's coming up here on First Take.
It's not the same guy anymore. Please don't lose the intensity. Keep the same intensity. Same intensity. You don't make any sense. I showed up to school with a dust.